Hello, everyone. And right now, we are going to explore muscle anatomy, but we will begin with a heart math meditation. So take a moment. You can place one hand on your chest, one hand on your belly, if that's supportive to you. Eyes gently closed, or just a soft gaze, and turn your attention to your breath. See if you can allow the chest to remain quiet in its movement and feel more of the movement of the breath in the lower rib cage, primarily the sides and the back of the rib cage as you inhale. And as you exhale, a gentle toning of the low belly back towards the spine as the front ribs remain quiet. Just taking a moment, settling into that sensation of breath. And when you're ready, turning your attention to the quality of your heart. Begin by being present with that and noticing that any movement you feel, including the heartbeat, is all generated by muscular contraction. So, this amazing system of muscles and their connection via the nervous system to create this vital movement that is necessary for life. And even though we're bringing conscious awareness to these qualities right now, this is existing all the time on autopilot by this incredible intelligence of our system. As you turn your awareness to your heart, think of something that brings a gentle upliftment to your mind, your body, your heart in this moment. Something that lifts your spirit, something very neutral. It's helpful to create a clear image in your mind's eye and really go into the felt sense of beauty, love, support, joy, gratitude, appreciation, nurturing, softness, tenderness, whatever emotion feels right for this moment for you as you hold to a clear image and breathe that into your heart. And we'll stay with that for just a few more breaths. Keep coming back if your mind wanders. Sense into your system the movement that is present and the ability to bring that energy into your heart. One more full deep breath. And if you wish to stay with this, you can pause the video. And when you're ready, we'll begin. Okay. So as I said, this video is about muscle anatomy. And here is a small reference to begin on some of the takeaways that you will have from watching this video, which are muscle and myofascial composition. So we're going to look at the architecture of muscle and also the architecture of the fascia that surrounds muscle. The word myo means muscle. How muscles create movement in the body, how the nervous system and the muscular system communicate, and the hierarchy of muscle activation. So we have three types of muscle in our body, two of which are under autonomic control, meaning we do not have voluntary conscious control of them. And that is our cardiac muscle and our smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is located within the hollow organs, like the digestive system and the uterus, and it lines all of our veins. Um, Skeletal muscle makes up the bulk of the muscle in our body, and that's what we'll be focusing on in this class. Okay, so skeletal muscle generates all the movement that we make in our body, and skeletal muscle is under our voluntary conscious control. Skeletal muscle is attached to bones via tendons. And we can see down here what attaches bone to bone is ligaments. So the connective tissue that attaches muscle to bone is tendons. Each muscle, so like our bicep, our gluteus max, is made up of muscle tissue, fascia, a form of connective tissue, nerves, that stimulate contraction and return sensory information back and forth from the nervous system, as well as arteries and veins and lymphatic supply. And all of these are bringing nutrients into the muscle and taking waste out of the muscle. And so based on our definition, that multiple tissues comprise organs, we can understand that each muscle in and of itself is actually an organ, as it is composed of various tissues. So let's begin with some muscle anatomy. So muscles are basically constructed like a really well-made rope, and their finest parts are thousands and thousands of these parallel threads called myofibrils, okay, which are bound together. So all these little myofibrils are bound together to create what's called a muscle fiber, or also the same word used for a muscle fiber is a myocyte. And that is an actual muscle cell. So a myofibril is not a cell, it is components that are bound together to create the first level of a muscle cell called a muscle fiber or a myocyte. Here is an image of a muscle cell, and so we see these different myofibrils that are within the muscle cell. And what you also see in this rendition are these little purple things, which are the mitochondria. So within all muscle cells, we have this organelle, this baby organ called mitochondria, and there are many within each muscle cell. And what's so important about mitochondria is that mitochondria are cellular bound organelles that convert oxygen and food energy into ATP, adenine triphosphate. Okay. And this molecule of ATP is the energy, it is the chemical energy that's needed to power all of the cell's biochemical reactions. So it is mitochondria are the energy production organelles. Okay. Muscles themselves are voracious energy hogs, and our muscles consume the majority of the oxygen and nutrients that we take into our body. And what they do is that they consume this chemical energy and they produce both mechanical and thermal energy. This is a funny little uh, diagram talking about the mechanical energy examples in everyday life. Um, but anything we do, from using a blender, typing on a keyboard, running, walking, blinking our eyes, those are all forms of mechanical energy. And the way that we have that capability is that we have converted chemical energy into mechanical energy and also thermal energy. And it is this mechanical energy that generates skeletal muscle contraction, which contributes to about 85% of our body's heat. So let's look at the layers of subcutaneous tissue. So we understand what we're looking at as we dive into the body. So the most superficial layer of tissue in our body is our epidermis, our skin. We drop down, we're into the dermis. Just below that is our superficial adipose tissue, that first layer of fat cushioning. And then we have the superficial fascia. It is like a layer of continuous saran wrap throughout our entire body, and it separates the superficial adipose from the deep adipose. Okay, so we have these layers of fat, and then we hit deep fascia. Okay. And deep fascia is one layer above superficial to the epimysium. The epimysium is the most outer layer of myofascia, of fascia that surrounds the muscle. And so as we dive now into the myofascia, just recognize that this is where we are when we look at that most outer layer of the fascia that surrounds the muscle. So here, we're going to look at all the different layers of the myofascia and every single muscle fiber. So that first level of muscle cell, and we can see all the little myofibrils in there, is surrounded and reinforced by a layer of fascia. And this innermost layer of fascia is called the endomysium, right here. Endo meaning within the muscles, and it surrounds each muscle cell. Muscle fibers, so the muscle cells and their surrounding endomysium come together in layered bundles called fascicles. So here we see all those muscle fibers being bundled together to this layer called the fascicle. And the fascicle is surrounded by the next most superficial layer of myofascia called the paramecium. And that means around the muscle. And it bundles all the muscle fibers together. And then we have multiple fascicles bundled by paramecium come together to form the organ of the muscle. And we can see here, which is comprised of the blood vessels, the nerves, the lymphatic tissue. So here is the entire organ of the muscle, and it is surrounded by the epimysium, the most outer layer, like we looked at in that picture just before. And then the epimysium becomes continuous with the deep fascia, which then becomes continuous with the tendon of the muscle that attaches it to the bone. Okay. Something that we can think of, or like an analogy we could make is like, if I can, is like a lemon or an orange, where this most outer outer layer between the skin and the sections is like the epimysium. And then the part that divides the lemon sections is like the paramecium. And then the fascia, or the connective tissue, we could call it, of the lemon that creates the tiny little bulbs of juice within the section within the sections is like the endomysium, and the juice itself is like the cells. Okay. So here is another, rendition of the muscle becoming tendon and attaching to bone. What's important to know is that on our bones, we also have the connective tissue of the bone itself. And here we can see it's sort of peeled away in this image. It's called the periosteum. And that is the connective tissue of the bone that is continuous with the bone itself. Tendons also have their own sort of layer of tissue around them called the peritendon, and that's in this sage green color here. And so this also shows you sort of that continuation. Muscle becomes tendon wrapped in peritendon, and the bright, vivid green is the periosteum. The tendon becomes continuous with the periosteum of the bone. And so, what I like about this image is it's just showing you the continuation of all of this connective tissue that surrounds the muscle. It's like this gray sheath is the epimysium and the deep fascia becoming tendon, becoming periosteum around the bone. Okay. Here we see um, this would be a cadaver image. This is a horizontal cut of a leg, posterior view, sorry, horizontal cut, superior view. So we're looking down on a horizontal cut of the thigh. The very center here is the femur bone. And here we're seeing the different compartments that are divided by the epimysium and of these different quadratus muscles, the sartorius on the medial thigh, the adductor muscles, and the um, hamstring muscles. And so we can see how they begin to get compartmentalized, and then there are also the veins and the arteries that are running through here. The next I'm going to show you is an actual cadaver image of this same viewpoint. And so here we have two thighs with the femur bone in the middle. You can see those deep layers of fat that are most superficial, and then how the muscles themselves are gently divided by these layers of myofascia. So, how do muscle fibers contract and create force? So, muscle fibers, the cells of muscles, are composed of threads called myofibrils. Remember the tiniest part, myofibrils. And myofibrils are composed of proteins, and they are divided into these lengthwise segments of proteins called sarcomeres. Each sarcomere contains actin, which is called thin or short filament, and myosin, which is called long, thick filament. Each sarcomere is divided by Z lines, that's these lines that go all the way across, on either end. Here is just another image of the molecular structure where the red would be the myosin and the blue would be the actin. And what we understand is that actin and myosin are sliding protein filaments, and they slide because of a chemical reaction that causes them to change shape. So they're like this, and then a chemical reaction comes into the muscle and they slide. And then once that chemistry is metabolized by the muscle, they release. So the only action that they create is this sliding towards each other in this direction. Okay? I'm going to show you just a little video about sarcomere contraction. Okay, so that's just a small example of sarcomere contraction. And so what we want to understand is that it is oxygen and food energy in the form of glucose or fat, if we're in a state of ketosis, that cause the mitochondria within the muscle to produce ATP. And for this pulling, this sliding to occur within the sarcomere, both calcium and ATP are converted into mechanical energy. So both of those molecules must be present, calcium and ATP. And the mineral calcium that is used for our muscles to contract is stored within our bones. And so we'll look more at that when we start to learn about bones. So, how does the nervous system innervate muscles? So, here we see both what is a motor neuron and a motor unit, and I'll explain the difference. So, the nerves that innervate skeletal muscles are called motor neurons. And as a motor neuron enters a muscle, it divides into several branches or many branches. And so here, this whole thing is the motor neuron, right? Here's the nucleus with its dendrites. Here's the axon, and here are the terminal endings. Okay, and so this whole part is the motor neuron itself. And each uh, terminal ending innervates one muscle fiber, one muscle cell. And it is the motor neuron and all the fibers that it innervates, which creates what's called a motor unit. Okay. I'm not blocking the words here. Um, Motor, we have both motor and sensory neurons, which are also called afferent and efferent neurons. And so motor neurons are efferent, and they're taking information away from from the central nervous system, from the brain and from the spinal cord, and they're sending information to skeletal muscle to create movement. So it's going away from the brain and the spinal cord into the muscles, and the signal is creating movement. Now, we also have sensory neurons, and those are called afferent neurons, back two, and they carry a nervous system impulse about stimulus and sensory information, and it's going in the opposite direction from what we feel in terms of sensation and taking it back to the brain to be interpreted. Okay, so we have information moving in both directions all the time. Let's look. that. Uh, I can get this. Here we go. And interpret what we are looking at here. And so this at the top is a motor neuron. Here's the axon. Here's its terminal ending. And this is the neuromuscular junction. And there is a signal that is sent via the neuromuscular junction into the muscle fiber itself, the muscle cell. And when the muscle cell receives that signal, the mitochondria down here, which is producing ATP, floods the the cell itself with the chemistry of ATP and calcium. And what the cell does is it uses that chemistry to contract and to pull. And once it metabolizes that chemistry, it releases. So that's what you're looking at here. Okay. So we have small motor units and large motor units. So the size of a motor unit correlates with the function of the muscle. Muscles that perform fine, coordinated control have very small motor units with a small number of branches from each neuron to the muscle fibers and therefore control output more finely. And so examples of that would be our eyes, how we move our eyes, and the coordination that we have in our hands is controlled by small motor units. We also have, like the example down here, we have large motor units and muscles that perform powerful but less coordinated actions, like the muscles of the legs and the back, have motor units that are really large with thousands of branches connected to thousands of muscle fibers per motor neuron. So think of the difference of what's needed to lift a cup of coffee opposed to lifting a 50-pound weight, right? When we go to create movement, the smallest motor neurons are recruited first, followed by progressively larger motor neurons. And this is the basis of what's called size principle and our body's intelligence of the conservation of energy and efficiency. And why are the smallest motor neurons recruited first? And size principle is actually based on the diameter of the nerve, that axon, that talks to the muscle. The smaller they are, then they're more easily excited and activated and require less energy to do so. So the smallest motor neurons are connected to the smallest muscle fibers, and the larger motor neurons are connected to the largest muscle fibers. And so by default, that means that the smallest muscle fibers are recruited first, followed by the largest muscle fibers. And that's the hierarchy of muscle activation, which has to do with our body's intelligence of conservation. Um, and what we understand from that is that the more motor units that are recruited, the more contractile force is generated by the muscle. The last term that we'll learn is a motor neuron pool. And what a motor neuron pool is the collection of all the motor neurons that innervate a single muscle. And so we may have certain motor neurons within a single muscle that are have an intelligence of being repeatedly activated, and other motor neurons within a same muscle that haven't been as activated, used, don't have that same brain body connection. And um, what this can do is create an imbalance in a muscle itself. And when we learn about more so about muscles and joints, this can really speak to how um, the clarity of joint movement may need to be supported by learning how to activate more of the motor neurons that stimulate a muscle. Okay, thank you so much. And in our next video, we will continue on to the biomechanics of muscular movement.